Hey there, I'm Jordan, and welcome back to my channel. This channel is all about filmmaking techniques, the philosophy of art, creative and technical workflows, and essentially what filmmaking can teach us about life. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm so excited to dive into the third part in our multi-part video series on how I made my short film about a professional cuddler called Cuddle Buddies, which I wrote, directed, edited, and produced. This third part will really dive into the production phase of the making of the film. So what is Cuddle Buddies? The logline is as follows. Cuddle Buddies tells the story of Lucy, a single mother who works as a professional cuddler in order to support her young daughter Marina and to alleviate the loneliness not only in her clients, but also in herself. Part 8. Shoot day number 2. Our second and third days of production were going to happen in a different location. They were set to happen in the exposed brick loft that was near downtown LA, and this was really the main shooting location because it was where Lucy's bedroom and her apartment was located, where the bulk of the film was going to be shot. Thankfully, the location had a freight elevator, so we were able to load all of our gear in and take it up to the second floor where the loft was located and pretty seamlessly load in, and also have plenty of room in the open floor plan to stage all the gear that wasn't going to be in the shots. We staggered our call time for day 2 to be a 10 a.m. general crew call. That way people had a little more time to recover. They had enough turnaround time, especially for the actors, and we were able to kind of come into day 2 with a little bit of cushion in the morning in case anything else had to be worked out or anything went wrong in the morning on the way to the shoot. The later call time also complied with a 12-hour minimum turnaround time from SAG for all of our actors, since that's the minimum they need before they can show up to set again after a day of shooting. Jess, Rock, and Alex were really able to section and partition off a lot of the space to make it feel like a more conventional apartment. And this included shifting some furniture, adding in some of our own furniture, creating drapes, putting curtains down, all this to make it feel like there was multiple rooms within this open floor plan loft that actually weren't there. We also sectioned off a corner of the loft and added a bed with a canopy. That way we could stage the very first scene of the film with Kylie and really make it feel like it's a whole nother client bedroom that you would never know is still that same loft when you watch the final film. For Jess's initial concept designs of all the character spaces, I'll put a link in the description below, which you can check out if you're interested. The first part of the morning entailed the setup of the canopy bed, where the very first scene of the film would be shot. Once the bed was set up, I walked through the blocking at half speed with some stand-ins. That way we could get a feel for how the light would be hitting actors in the scene. And this also helped me to clarify and really refine my blocking, especially once we were able to see the actual space and the setup. Once Brennan had the lighting set and we were happy, we invited Kylie, played by Janine Oda, and Lucy, played by Caitlin Clare, to come to the set to shoot our first scene of the day. My strategy for shooting the scene was to keep a very intimate focus on both of the characters and really use macro close-ups on each of their faces laying on a bed, almost in a horizontal framing, so that we could essentially cut back and forth between those in the edit. I always find it helpful to think like an editor when you're shot listing and you're actually covering your film on the day. This way you always make sure that you get the coverage you need for the edit. My goal was really to try to put the audience inside the cuddle scene as if they were there taking part in the cuddle session, getting cuddled and feeling all of the warm feelings themselves. Again, we started the day with a very complicated dolly in where we utilized the crane, moved into the canopy, and had it push up and do a bird's eye view looking down on the characters. And we must have done 9 or 10 takes of this until we finally got the shot exactly as I envisioned. And I'll admit, I was very nitpicky. I was very meticulous and detail oriented of every element of the shot, even down to the timing of the crane and the rhythm. And if I saw even one small bump or the timing didn't align, I would cut it or I'd have us redo it. So I'm sure that was something the crew was not the most pleased about. But once we nailed the shot, I knew it was going to be perfect until we ended up actually nixing the shot in the edit. I laugh thinking about this now, since we spent over 10 takes on this setup, and then in the final film we ended up nixing the shot entirely in the edit for runtime purposes. And so it's one of those things where we didn't know we actually didn't need it until we didn't need it. but it still was important for me on the day to actually know that we got the shot, just in case we didn't end up using it. And at the time, that was our lead-in into that scene that I thought we would keep. It also builds the confidence to know that you can pull off complicated scenes with a little bit of extra time and persistence on the actual day. The rest of the scene went smoothly, and we were able to finish our first scene and wrap Janine completely before we even started lunch. The next scene was of Lucy having a very intense and emotional moment on the phone with her divorce attorney, and really her bringing out the absolute pinnacle of emotion while talking to somebody who wasn't even on the other end of the line. I still look at this scene and am constantly amazed at how quickly Caitlin was able to get in and out of character, but also she was able to repeat that pinnacle of emotion and the raw scream in her voice. Fuck you, James! Time and time again for all the different angles of coverage that we needed to get. Truly impressive feat of acting to be able to get in and out and not even have another scene partner on the other end of the line. So incredible performance from Caitlin, and still one of the most raw moments of the film. Every time I watch it, I still just get hairs on the back of my end, especially when she screams at full force. I think we feel the weight of her entire situation all crumbling at once behind her. After nailing this scene, the actor playing James, played by Chris Anthony Ferrer, showed up, and we were able to block out the proposal scene, which is still one of my favorite scenes in the film as well. Part of the challenge of this scene was selling the genuine surprise and reaction of Lucy being proposed to and making it feel like it was the first time she was getting proposed to every single time we ran the scene after that first take. It really is a testament to Caitlin and Chris's acting ability that they were able to believably make it feel like a real proposal time and time again, which is very difficult to do because of the genuine surprise that she would have been feeling in that moment, getting proposed to, especially waking up and not expecting it in the way that it's staged in the scene. This scene was also a lot of fun since we actually gave Chris a real DV camcorder and he was able to flip the screen around, but in a way he also had to be a camera operator and maintain a proper framing, since within the edit we cut to that actual angle that he shot of the both of them. So it was very important that in addition to acting in the scene and staying in character, he had to maintain the frame and keep both his and Caitlin's head in the frame when they actually end up kissing, and he nailed it. So Chris, not only are you a great actor, but you also could have a career as a camera operator as well. The thing that was so rewarding was seeing the genuine chemistry between Caitlin and Chris on the day when they were staging the scene. They looked and felt like a real couple, and it felt so heartwarming just to be able to see them perform this scene. So again, another gift with such a great cast to work with is you as a director run through the emotional roller coaster of the story along with the actors as you're filming it at the same time. Finally, it was time for lunch, and after we broke for lunch, our 6-year-old awesome star Lorelei Olivia Moat, playing Marina, showed up to set for the first time with her dad and our studio teacher from Stella Pacific Management, and it was the first time she ever graced our set. Because there is a large family montage that we were going to be shooting after lunch, it was very important that the actors gelled and had that natural chemistry, since a lot of the shots in that montage are very quick shots, very rapidly cycled through in the edit, and really just had to have that feel without a lot of dialogue that they actually were a family. And visually with their acting, they had to represent all of this with very little dialogue at all. We got very fortunate in that all of the actors gelled so incredibly well and looked very natural and realistic as a family on camera. And Lorelei was so incredibly well behaved and professional and prepared, and it was one of the most joyful experiences directing any actors that I've ever had in my life. One of the cool shots we blocked out was an action style running shot where we had Lorelei run around the length of the apartment while we followed her with the handheld cam. We shot it in slow motion, and in the edit it almost resembles an action sequence, the way that she dodges around furniture, looks under things, and ultimately ends up approaching the bed where Chris pops out and surprises her and starts tickling her. And it was just such a fun, awesome scene that I think turned out so well in the final product. With our scheduling constraints, we did end up nixing a handful of shots that were going to be in the montage, but looking back, I don't think there's a single shot that was originally supposed to be shot that we didn't get that I really miss, mainly because with a montage, I think think if you capture the essence of what it's supposed to be, it doesn't necessarily matter that you get every single shot, as long as you're capturing how it's supposed to elide time and how it's really supposed to progress the story and give you the feeling of what it's trying to do. I think we captured that with all the shots that we did get. For montages, my approach is to capture everything that you can and then really utilize the strength of editing to really sell that feeling of what the montage is supposed to feel like, effectively allowing you a little bit of leeway if you don't get every single shot that you were hoping to get on the actual shoot day. We were able to run through various setups for the montage, and one of the best decisions that we made was using a second camera, a Sony a7S mirrorless DSLR camera that wasn't our main camera, just to have something to shoot additional footage while they were setting up the main shots and lighting. So in between a lot of the lighting setups, I was able to just use this camera and capture a lot of shots on the fly just because we were waiting around for the crew to finish setting up anyway. Between the Sony a7S and the camcorder that we had, me and the actors were able to grab a ton of extra shots that ended up almost just being bonus shots, and a lot of which actually ended up making their way into the final film in the montage sequence. So in this way, it was so worth utilizing that time to still grab those shots that really ended up becoming some of the most organic and my favorite shots that are in the montage because they feel so real and not quite as rehearsed. Key takeaway number 5, shoot extra footage of actors, B-roll, scenery, environments, props whenever you can, especially if you have a lot of downtime while you're waiting on set. You never know what types of shots could end up saving you in the edit or adding to your film just because you ended up grabbing them when you weren't expecting to. So in that way, it's such a great way to utilize extra downtime to your advantage, especially for the edit. After we finished our shots with Lorelai, we were able to wrap her on time, especially before she hit her minimum 7 hours on set. And then we were able to wrap out our second day with a very intense, emotional, slow motion kiss scene between Caitlin and Chris in the kitchen. And one of the only shots we actually used the kitchen for in that entire location. And once we wrapped that, that was a wrap on our day 2 of the shoot. Part 9, shoot day number 3. The best part about our third day of the shoot was that from the night before, we were able to do what they call walk away, which is where we were able to leave all of our gear in place. Everything could stay where it was, and we were all able to just go home because we were using the same location the next day. This saved us a ton of setup time and stress when we were able to load in on our third day. Everything was ready to go, and we could immediately resume shooting, which made everybody on the crew a lot happier. The major change we had was Henry Brower took over from Justin as the first AD for this last day of the shoot, working with child actors. Our third and final shoot day really consisted mostly of scenes between Lorelai and Caitlin, and really covered a lot of the scenes between Lucy and Marina, getting to know them as characters, establishing the strength of their relationship dynamic as mother and daughter on screen and in the film. My biggest anxiety on this day was that Lorelai had a ton of lines, so it really depended on her getting these lines right to be able to move on to each subsequent shot on the schedule so that we could have the adequate coverage. And so this very much made me very scared, but I should have had nothing to fear since the day came. Lorelai and Caitlin nailed it, and those ended up being some of the most heartwarming scenes in the entire film, including the shooting of the last scene in the film, which still brings tears to my eyes even when I watch it today. Lorelai was absolutely prepared and professional, and she even improvised a line, "I love you, mommy," at the end of the film that wasn't even in the script, and to this day I still think it's one of the best lines in the entire film.
I love you, mommy.
So just goes to show Lorelai is a better writer than I am. One of the ways I knew the scenes were working is even when I was at the monitor watching them perform, I lost myself in the film and at times forgot I was supposed to be directing the shoot, which I took as a good sign that other people watching in the audience would fully immerse themselves in this relationship as well. I looked around and the location owner and everyone else on crew seemed to also be getting a little emotional, though they probably didn't admit it at the time. This was also a sign I knew that the scenes were working. Key takeaway number 6. When working with child actors, I have 2 big pieces of advice. Number 1, incentivize them with stuffed animals, with candy, if it's okay with the parents, with anything that'll just show that you appreciate the work they're doing, and it allows them to stay focused for that extra amount of time you need, especially if you have additional angles of coverage and they're starting to lose focus. It's a great way to just show them they are going to get rewarded for the great work they're doing, especially if if they're really delivering some incredible performances for you on the day. Number 2, make sure to look for child actors who oftentimes will look directly into the camera lens during a take. If everything's going really well and then they look into the lens, that can be the ruining of a really great take that was going really well up until that moment. Again, this just adds more time to the capturing of that scene if you have to keep redoing it. The other thing to look out for is oftentimes children will look for where the nearest guardian figure is, and sometimes this means they can look away from the scene partner during the scene, losing focus, and again, ruining a perfectly good take because they're not looking at the proper eye line. So sometimes it's good to remind them in between to constantly stay focused, or even reposition the parent if it's a little closer to where they need to be looking. This is a really good way to keep the child actor focused and engaged in the scene if they're not already. One other note I will make is to be very mindful of the parents when casting a child actor. Sometimes, unfortunately, there are nightmare parents who really make your shoot much more of a headache, since they might try to step in and direct their kid. They might try to direct you. They might try to have you wrap their child early, especially if you don't have everything you need. So just many things to look out for, that sometimes when you're casting the child, you are also casting the parents. Part 10, working with assistant directors, part 2. One thing to point out is working with great assistant directors is essential to having a shoot that is much more successful in terms of staying on time and schedule and budget, and also allows you to capture the greatest art within the tight parameters of what your schedule allows. I really want to shout out both Justin and Henry, since they did such a great job of communicating with us, allowing us leeway, but also cracking the whip when it was necessary to, and ensuring that we really did have a very successful production for all 3 days. The standard operating procedure of how it would usually work is the ADs and Brennan and I would confer about what the scene was. They would allow me a certain amount of time for blocking. I would block out the scene. Once I felt good with it, Brennan would see it and then figure out the best way to light it based off what the blocking was. And then after that, Brennan would give us an estimate of how long it would take to light the scene. Once that was done, ideally it would be within the time constraints. If not, then Brennan would tell them a little more time was needed. Then once lighting was set, we would invite the actors onto the set. We would run 1 or 2 rehearsals, and then we would start shooting the scene. In between takes, Justin and Henry would often let me know about how much time we had until we really had to move on to the next setup or next scene. And I always did my best to try to follow the schedule as closely as I could. It's always a balance of trying to capture the best art while also still staying on time and schedule. There were so many conversations that Brennan and Justin and Henry and I would have where oftentimes we would have to be very honest with each other, and we would have to be very adaptable in what we had to rework or scrap or even get rid of, and really make sure that we were delivering the absolute best art that we could with the time that we had. The reality is that as an independent director with less of a budget, it really does force you to get creative when you have constraints on your hands, and I think it allows you to learn how to do more with less, which is such an essential skill for any filmmaker. Part 11, finishing day 3. One of the other major scenes we had to shoot on day 3 was a very emotionally charged scene where Caitlin and Chris have a massive argument, and this is all in the midst of their divorce within the film. They're shouting at each other. It gets very heated, and the biggest challenge was making sure that this felt realistic, but also still grounded in the performances, and also that we could work Lorelai in without having it completely traumatize her as a kid actor in real life. We made sure to double check with Lorelai's parents. We outlined everything that was going to be happening, and they were on board for it. And the best part was all the actors completely nailed the scene and committed. And a lot of this day was also trickier because it involved a lot of improv from Caitlin and Chris. They were shouting things at each other that weren't in the script, and a lot of the day ended up being them just pulling the meanest things they could think to say to each other in the moment. Since we weren't going to use the audio in that scene, it was over a montage with music, we knew that what they were saying wasn't as important as them really channeling the emotion with their facial expressions, with their physical acting. And again, it was a very heavy day, but some of the most emotionally moving scenes I think we captured on that day. After that, we were able to picture wrap Lorelai, and then we really only had one last setup until we were able to finish the shoot entirely. Our last setup involved using the doorway dolly and the Panavision Prime compact zoom so that we could create our own version of what they call a ZOLLY, or a zoom dolly effect, also known as the vertigo shot, or the shot that you see in Jaws where the space is constricting in on itself. And essentially what that shot is as you're zooming out, you're dollying the camera in, but it can be a very difficult shot to achieve. The timing of the shot is very particular, since if you don't match the zoom with the timing of the dolly moving, it throws off the timing of the shot as a whole. This was the last shot that was going to be in the montage, and really capped off a very surrealist type of setup that I always envisioned from the start. This shot was symbolically supposed to represent the dissolving of the marriage between Lucy and James, and in this way I always loved the idea of they're in this white void that's more of an ethereal space, and they're floating away from each other, almost as if there's some extra worldly or spiritual presence that's pulling them apart from each other, and they're reaching for each other with the wedding rings, and yet it's still not enough for them to contain their union. And it's just showing the way the universe is bound to pull them apart, and that's the natural law of how it's supposed to go. James floating away in a ZOLLY-like effect to really sell that surrealist feeling and really showcase that this event is not really happening, but it's happening probably in the heads of Lucy and or James. It was a very difficult shot that required a lot of time, since we put Chris on the doorway dolly standing, and then we had a dolly grip who crouched low to be out of frame, pushing Chris on a dolly track away from Caitlin while we zoomed out with the lens, and also had to make sure to rack the focus out in a certain way so that we could get it to feel like everything was starting to go blurry and out of focus on a specific cue. So a lot of this was me talking while we were shooting it. We went through this many times. This was one where the crew definitely got frustrated with me. I can definitely see that on some of the raw footage. So sorry about that. This was such a great example of teamwork at its finest, since Brendan had to pull the zoom with a remote focus that he had on his rig. And then our first AC, Amanda Patron, had to also rack the focus in conjunction with the zoom timing, which also had to align with the timing of the dolly grip, pushing Chris away at a certain speed and rhythm. So all this in conjunction, we all had to work together, and eventually we got the right combo of shots for both Caitlin and Chris respectively as they're floating away from each other to really symbolize the ending of this marriage. But my philosophy is, on the day, while we're all there, everything's been paid for. If a little extra inconvenience or frustration is what I cause, but in the end product, which will stand the test of time, it's exactly as it needed to be, and that's something I will always defend 10 times out of 10. Key takeaway number 7. As a director, I think it is absolutely essential to push yourself, your cast, and your crew to get the absolute best work that you can, especially once you're all assembled there on the shoot day. So you owe it to yourself and to the audience to maximize that time and make sure you capture everything as perfectly as you're able to given the circumstances. After we had completed this last setup, we had officially wrapped production on Cuddle Buddies, and I remember the glorious feeling of relief but also excitement, especially after all the months and years of getting this film made, to finally be able to celebrate what I always think is the hardest, most stressful part, is getting everybody there to shoot it. It truly felt like a dream come true, one I still think about and I'll never forget to this day. Every time I step on a set, I think it's that incredibly amazing feeling to be able to get to do this every single time. We had to load all of our equipment out very quickly, and unfortunately did end up incurring a little bit of an additional overtime charge, but at least we finished the film and it was the very last day of production, so we were all able to go home. I was able to crash and I slept like a baby that night. It's a very interesting sensation to go from the intense adrenaline rush of being on a shoot and what that does to your body, and then the moment it's all over, how intensely you just completely crash and how quickly your body gives out on you. Part 12, stress management. A major takeaway that I learned from this specific shoot, how to adequately manage your stress levels on a shoot, especially if you're the director. It's so crucial that you learn how to adequately channel your stress and how to cope and how to adequately manage it. Since so often there's so many questions coming at you, everybody's looking to you for the answer. You're the person who needs to know what's going on, and you really have to be a leader in that sense. But you're always fighting the clock, trying to make sure you have enough time and money. And it's one of those things where your creative decision making starts to become adversely affected if your stress levels are too high. I'll admit that I am very much a person who gets stressed very quickly and very easily. So for me, I had to really learn how to manage my stress levels, how to take a deep breath and slow everything down and take one question at a time. And oftentimes that meant just saying, I'll get to you in a second. I'll take this one now, answer, move to the next question. And you go down the line systematically until everybody has the answers they need. And in this way, it allows you to maintain stability, keep your stress levels low, and just handle one thing at a time so you don't get too overwhelmed too quickly. The other thing that can be really helpful is sometimes to take a quick step away. If you need to step outside to get a breath of fresh air, if you need to go excuse yourself to use the bathroom, and that's the best way to recharge, sometimes you just have to take a step away, allow yourself a moment to get out of the chaos, to think clearly, and let your body recharge, to be able to come up with the best ideas creatively and figure out solutions, especially when you're faced with major problems that were unforeseen when you were planning the shoot. If you can keep your stress levels lower, it allows you to think more clearly and calmly, but also you're able to much more successfully troubleshoot problems when they arise. Another thing that really helps when the stress levels start to rise is if you are adequately prepared. You can always fall back on responses or answers that you have already thought about before the shoot. In case your stress levels or the nerves get too high, you can fall back on the creative ideas you've already developed before you ever stepped foot on the shoot. Making sure to follow up with all your collaborators, though, is a surefire way to allow them to do their best work, but also to make sure they carry out your vision properly. And also, in turn, it really does keep your stress levels lower as you handle one question at a time and get more of them checked off your list. In conclusion, directing a film is an endless array of work and preparation. Every week, I'll recommend something that inspired me from the past week and why. This week, I want to recommend the film Challengers, which is still in theaters. It stars Zendaya, Josh O'Connor, and Mike Faist, and is directed by Luca Guadagnino, who did Call Me By Your Name. It's such a sleek and sexy film. I think it really captures these three actors in the pinnacle right now of their acting abilities and careers, which makes for an extremely exciting love triangle dynamic throughout the entire film. The film isn't really about tennis, which is one of the things I love about it. It's set amongst the world of professional tennis and all of the dynamics of how a tennis match can really feel like a relationship. I also want to highlight that it's an absolutely amazing script. I also want to highlight Luca's directing skill for how excitingly he covered one of the tennis matches in the film without giving anything away. Really utilizes all the filmmaking techniques to put you inside that match and make you feel the excitement of the tennis, but also in turn, the relationship dynamics that are at play throughout the entire film. So if you have any recs from me, I'd love to hear yours below. That concludes part 1 of production, which is the third section of our multi-part video case study series on the making of my short film Cuddle Buddies. Leave a comment below, leave a thumbs up. Let me know if there's any other ways that you do production or any other production topics you want me to cover, and I'll definitely make sure to cover them in a future video.